Welcome to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. We are the go-to resource for leaders looking to greatly improve their communication skills, whether it's one-on-one interactions, team settings, public speaking, or your digital communication. By improving these skills, leaders can create stronger connections and drive positive change within their organization. Each and every episode, we sit down with leaders from various fields, just like you're grabbing a cup of coffee with them. We dive into real, practical conversations. Our goal is to help you transform your communication skills so you can lead more effectively, build stronger relationships, and make a lasting impact. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's learn together. Well, have you ever struggled to capture someone's attention? Maybe in a meeting, maybe for a sales pitch, maybe even just in a conversation. Well, what if I told you that there's one sentence that could be the key to persuading anyone, whether you're trying to land a client, motivate your team, develop a powerful presentation? Well, today on the Speak with People podcast, we're going to dive into that. And we're joined by an amazing author, a persuasion expert, and the author of the most powerful sentence of all time. And I cannot wait to dive into this interview. I have followed our guest today, Neil Gordon, for a long time. So appreciate his writing, so appreciate what he brings to leaders all over the world. And I can't wait to dive into this conversation. So get ready, because really think that this interview is going to help transform some of your thinking and your leading. Well, Neil, welcome to the Speak with People podcast.
Thanks very much, Jason.
Well, hey, before we hop into the conversation, maybe take us into your story a little bit, who you are, what you do, what's kind of got you to this place.
Well, as a language person and a persuasion expert, as you described me, an assumption that many might make is that I have a background in the language arts. Maybe I was an English major at some fancy college, and maybe I've always been into reading and writing and all of that. But the truth of the matter is that I grew up hating reading. And actually, I was quite bad at it too. In that, while I had a lot of proficiency for it as a young child, as a 5 or 6 year old, I was very advanced. I quantifiably deteriorated in my capacity to read the more and more I got through school. So I might have been I was in the 99th percentile for reading comprehension when I was in first grade. And by the time I was in 7th grade, I was in the 54th percentile. And by the time I took the SATs for the first time as a sophomore in high school, I got a 330 on my verbal score, which put me in the 5th percentile.
Okay.
So my brain turned to mush. Thank you, American education system. And it wasn't until I was in the second half of college, I started reading for leisure finally. And then I moved to New York City when I graduated from from college. And I just started reading books that not only were entertaining, but they actually challenged my worldview, and they challenged what I believed to be true about my life. And that led to a massive, massive inquiry into how communicating through the page in this case could so greatly challenge what I thought to be true up until that point. And through a series of events, I wound up getting an editorial assistant job at Penguin before they had merged with Random House. And for a few years there, I was a low-level editor at Penguin, working with New York Times bestselling authors. And that became my apprenticeship for what I do today, which is teaching people how to be much more persuasive, compelling, attract more attention and interest, but without the snake oil, without everyone needing a shower afterwards.
Ooh. Right? Well, I love that.
You know what I'm talking about there, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, so many. You get done talking with people and you're like, oh, okay. All right.
I'm going to go eat empty calories now.
Please. Oh, I love that. Oh my goodness. That is powerful. So you moved to New York City, like you're still in your teenage years.
I was 22, and
okay.
I lived there for, I mistakenly said high school, but it was actually after college. And I then moved to LA for about 10 years, somewhere in the middle there. And then I came back to New York after that.
Uh, Not to put either city on the spot, but
Mm.
in your since you've lived in both, is there one over the other? I mean, you moved back to New York, but would you still live in LA if you could? I mean, which city has your heart more?
I would say that in a dream scenario, Jason, I think I would love to be in Santa Monica, where I wound up by the end of my time in LA. I would love to be in Santa Monica for maybe 4 months out of the year, the cold months, and
Yep.
just do winter over there and then come back to New York because I miss Santa Monica, but I don't miss LA County
Yeah.
because that being in a car culture just doesn't work for me
Ooh.
ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was in Queens
Oh,
doing a
yeah?
training for Flagstar Bank, a couple of branches, and uh, we live in Tampa.
Mhm.
Not too many places are like right on top of each other. And I forgot, some of those sections in Queens. I mean, it is
Yeah.
like you are like boom, 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 boom.
Very concentrated. Yeah. And that's actually even more spread out than a fair amount of the rest of the city, certainly more spread out than Manhattan. Like Manhattan is this whole other beast entirely.
Oh, yeah. I just enjoyed it because back in the day I watched Entourage and they were from Queens, and so I thought, oh, look at
Yeah.
this, a little bit. Uh,
Yeah.
our listeners are gonna absolutely get so much out of this, and so you talk about how we need to understand this most powerful sentence, and
Mm.
talk about wow, this is a big one. I mean, you go so far to say this of all time, like you've got to. Why is this sentence so impactful?
One of the ways that I can qualify this particular sentence as being as powerful as it is because there are a number of ancient thinkers, let's say the ancient philosophers from Athens or Sun Tzu of Chinese ancient history, and other people as well, that when we look up their quotes on Goodreads or Brainy Quote, or we see them quoted in people's presentations, to say nothing of all the many contemporary thinkers we encounter through TED Talks and best-selling nonfiction books and all of that, we see one pattern, one kind of sentence show up again and again and again. We see them getting the most votes on those quote websites. We see them getting the most highlights in the Kindle editions of nonfiction books. Again and again, we see this happen so that while someone like Socrates, for example, or Socrates, however you choose to pronounce it, because
Yep.
Socrates is apparently the appropriate and true way to pronounce it. But if we look at someone like that, he didn't write himself, but Plato did, or Plato. He wrote about his teacher, and the Republic was just this massive work. I mean, there's so much writing about that, and yet he is often quoted as saying, "All of philosophy begins in wonder."
Mm.
Right? This one sentence just shows up. Art of War is this whole book, it's this whole treatise on military strategy. And yet there's one line on line 18 of the first chapter that gets quoted in popular culture, like TV shows today. Remember The West Wing,
Oh
right?
yeah.
That show from the 2000s. In the third or fourth season, I don't remember which one of the characters quotes Sun Tzu to another character. He says, "You forgot that all of warfare is based on deception."
Oof.
Okay. One after another, we see these things not only show up in these ancient works or what have you, but they keep getting stated and they've broken through centuries of noise and are
Mm.
still utilized today. And so, what if we could harness that kind of potency and cut through all the noise of the information age? And in the meantime, empower our audiences, empower the people we're talking to, and attract them to what we're working on or what we're seeking to achieve in this world.
Wow. Whew. But that's great. I mean, that's probably why you describe it as the silver bullet, right? For persuasion.
Correct.
I mean,
Right.
this
When we
is
think, yeah, exactly. When we think about the werewolf lore, the silver bullet was the only thing that could kill the werewolf.
mm,
You could throw anything you had at it, all sorts of, in this analogy, noise, and none of it would work because of this mystical, magical creature. But the silver bullet was the one thing that cut through all of it. It was the one thing that was effective. And so when we think about a 45-minute speech or an 80,000 word book or any extensive amount of training or material or speaking or conversation or what have you, this one sentence will be the thing that cuts through. And whether people realize it or not, that's going to be the thing that stays with them.
Wow. Wow. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how do we, as day-to-day leaders, how do we wrap it into our, is it best for one-on-one conversations? Is it best for sales conversations? Is it best
Mm.
for just the persuading? How do we walk this through?
Because it's so fundamental to a person's thought process or methodology or thought leadership, whatever it might be, it can find its way into all of the above.
Mm.
In terms of quantifying its effectiveness, of course, context and execution certainly play a role. And if you get if let's say you mentioned interpersonal communication, like a conversation, if you get super formal and stodgy and salesy and rigid about, oh, I'm going to say the silver bullet because that guy Neil on Jason's podcast said that this is what I'm supposed to say to be more persuasive. If it comes off as robotic and
Yep.
canned, you're going to lose a lot of the human to human connection element. And so there's a time and a place, and there's also a way to go about doing it. But what I teach people in terms of, let's say, an elevator pitch,
Yeah.
is that someone asks, what do you do? Let's say at a networking event. And the silver bullet can find its way in there. But you don't just hammer them with a silver bullet. I like to say that it's not a tagline. You don't lead with a silver bullet. You lead to a silver bullet.
Oh.
So it's just a little bit of a difference in what you're saying, but it actually makes all the difference. And
Right.
so generally the method is to build up to it as a climactic moment. So if someone asks, what do you do? Most people say, oh, well, I'm an engineer, or I'm a software executive, or whatever it might be. But if someone asks, what do you do? You could start with a problem that people care about solving, what your ideal audience might care about solving.
Yep.
You know how hard it is to achieve this thing. And they're like, oh yeah, sure. Well, what we often do is try to solve it with this flawed solution or that one. And these things don't work. And they're like, yeah, of course they don't work. But then you hit them with the silver bullet and say, well, the key to solving this problem is blank, or the key to solving this problem is not this, but rather this. And then you describe what you do. And so you lead to that big sentence. You lead to that idea rather than hammering people over the head with it.
And that's where I think a lot of us go wrong, because we just want to jump right to it. Or especially like you're talking about in some of those situations when we're doing that elevator pitch or we're at some type of networking thing and someone says, what do you do? We've never even thought about the thought that we could actually have a well thought through response. It's just, we just always regurgitate something new.
Right. We tend to forget that for someone who doesn't know us or know our stuff, it's automatically novel. I just this week, the week that we are recording this, Jason, my book launched. My very first book came out 2 days ago.
Congrats.
I was so I was like, I wouldn't go so far as say doubtful, but by the 20th or 30th time I had gone through the manuscript or through the pages or whatever it is to line edit it or to proofread or whatever it was, or to read the audio edition and record that in a studio.
Yep.
It's like, my God, are people going to be into this? But I had forgotten that people are going to be reading it for the first time, unlike me, who has been with it for a very long time, kind of thing.
Right.
So our stuff is always novel to those who haven't heard it before, or in this case, read it before.
Right.
So it's okay to go in with the same thing you've said to 1,000 other people before, because if they haven't heard it, then it's going to automatically be a value.
Right. Oh, it's so good. Well, it's vision leaks, right? Like it's amazing. Sometimes as leaders, we say the same thing on our videos or wherever
Hmm.
we're at over and over and over. And just like you said, we get tired of saying it, but
Right.
it's always someone's first time hearing it. Or, oh, I can't, I just read it this week. Average person, after 2 hours after hearing someone's speech or presentation, forgets
Yeah.
70% of it. I mean,
Oh,
it's
right.
right. So it's
Well, I would go so far as to say, Jason, that when embracing certain principles, we can get that number down.
yes.
I believe that something that does or doesn't stick isn't just inherent and rigidly held. It might be an average, that 70%, but when a person really knows how to bring a crowd along with them on a journey, a lot more of it then winds up sticking.
Yeah. Oh, true. So then, how do we, if there's a leader listening to this going, okay,
Mhm.
this sounds awesome. I know I need to be more persuasive. I need to
Mhm.
add this into it. But they're timid. They're struggling. What are some
Sure.
initial kind of first steps for them to start to take?
I usually start people with figuring out what their larger message, what their silver bullet is, what is their sentence, because that becomes the hub of the wheel. And then a keynote speech or a TED like talk or a book or an article or a letter from the CEO to employees, like an internal communication, or even a podcast appearance, whatever it is that a person is doing to communicate their ideas to others. Even if it's like a statement in the boardroom when you're sitting around the conference room table or what have you. Any of these situations, it really helps to for yourself, not in the necessarily the order of what you say to people, but in terms of clarifying things and working out messaging strategy. I recommend that you start with figuring out what the sentence is
Mm,
and then build structure around that. And I can, of course, share with our listeners and viewers a few simple things to do to get started with all of that.
yeah.
But the important thing to remember is that when you start with the foundation, much like with a house, you can then build a much more stable structure or
Mm.
building in the analogy. You can build a much more stable and predictably impactful body of content, body of work.
So important.
Yeah.
Why is it so often leaders we rush through the process? It's well, I'm not good with words, or it doesn't
Mm.
really matter. I'll just think of it, when it comes to me, or I'll just. Why is it sometimes we don't put in the prep work, the time to think through these kind of things?
I imagine that a lot of that, Jason, is fairly individual to the person.
Mm,
And what I will say is that a lot of I basically work with people who are very accomplished, often highly educated, highly expert in their fields. They have PhDs and MDs and JDs, or if they're not on the educated route, they're maybe very successful entrepreneurs or whatever, or maybe all of the above. And no matter how accomplished somebody is, no matter how much evidence they have of the value that they can contribute to the world, what so many people in the world, and specifically whom I've worked with, tend to demonstrate is that they all are carrying very old, very deep seated wounds about
mm,
somebody else telling them that what they put down on the page isn't good enough.
wow.
And so what I find is that good writing is a skill, but poor writing is a symptom.
Wow.
And so so rushing right through it is a symptom of something, like you just said. If somebody's rushing through it, one way we could, I mean, again, it's highly individual to the person, but one possible theory for some people, they might rush through it because spending too much time in that uncertain gray area of birthing something out into the world might be a little too vulnerable for them. It might leave them way too open to judgment, to criticism, and a general message that they're not good enough to be putting something out there. So
Yep.
they rush right through it to armor themselves up to what other people might be inclined to say to them. And it's, again, not the definitive end all and be all of why someone would rush through something, but that's an example.
Yep.
And so if they rush through it and their writing isn't very thought out and it plays that way and it doesn't really resonate with people, it's a symptom of something that probably a 5 or 7 or 10-year-old version of them went through once upon a time.
Wow. Wow. So maybe super practical, but
Yeah.
on Monday, actually, I have a pitch presentation
Mm.
with a CEO of a company. I met her when I was speaking at a conference in the fall, and January 3rd, I'm like, I should take my shot. So
Yeah.
she'd given me her email, and I honestly, up to that point, I was just a little too scared. I mean,
Sure.
she's kind of a big
Established.
deal, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I emailed her directly, and she responded, and she said, "Yeah, I'd love to know about your idea." So, you know, for people in my boat, I know this happens every day for people, and one of the things
Mhm.
that you help people do, you know, all the time, you help them kind of take their message and turn it into a movement. You know, clarify it.
Yeah.
What advice would you give other people who are, you know, getting ready to take their pitch and give it, and, you know, present it?
What I think would be helpful for you and for everyone, Jason, would be to break down. I just sort of glanced through it when I talked about it in the context of an elevator pitch, but the content that I have my people create tends to, at its core, feature the same 4 parts.
Hmm.
And with understanding around and even eventual mastery of those 4 parts, you can be highly persuasive using the silver bullet concept and also be highly agile in how you adapt that clarity to different situations.
Hmm.
And so when I did that elevator pitch earlier, that was based on 4 parts. And when I have people create talks or chapters of a book or an article or whatever it might be, the first part is naming the problem that people care about solving.
Yep.
Okay, now this is a very important thing. A lot of us, let's say you do a lot of work on finding that silver bullet, that clear idea, that thing that other people will highlight and quote in their presentations and all of that. And you're so excited about it and you lead with it. You just say it right out the gates. The thing is that while a silver bullet is powerful because it empowers people without context, when you can just go up to someone and say all of warfare is based on deception, and they already have a recipe for how to win at war.
Mm.
They know what the purpose of this recipe is, and they have the key action to do it. Just deceive your opponent. And we have all of these examples throughout military history of people winning, defying so many odds because they misdirected their opponent and deceived them into submission. Anyway, even though it empowers without context, a little bit of context goes a long way. And
Mm.
so, how do we create that context? We start with the problem that other people care about because that's what gets them invested in finding a solution.
Yep.
And so, my late father was a school teacher and he became a substitute teacher in his retirement. And he and the other substitute teachers weren't getting keys. And like it just was humiliating for him to be standing outside waiting for the custodial staff to let him in along with all of his students. And he felt like it undermined his authority. But when I had him write the principal to ask for keys, I didn't have him frame it in terms of the humiliation he felt. I had him talk about the safety of the students
Ah.
because he couldn't lock or unlock the door when there was a physical threat and there was a lockdown in the school the previous year. Some students asked to go to a different classroom because they at least could be locked in,
Mm.
whereas the students in his classroom couldn't because he didn't have the key. That's what compelled the principal to give them keys because he framed it in the context of a problem the principal cared about solving, not the emotional experience of the subs, but the safety of the students.
Wow.
Right. So that's people are more likely to embrace a solution when it's provided within the context of a problem they care about solving.
Which is so tough because, uh, and I've been there, definitely as a younger communicator, but I've listened to so many presentations where the first 20 minutes are just about them. and their
Them, their
accomplishments
stuff.
and their,
They
it's
tell
like
their
they're,
this is actual professional advice from some people in the public speaking world, is to just start with your story. And I think it's terrible advice.
yes,
It's awful
yes,
because they don't want to know your story. They want a transformation.
right. It's that's so profound because
Yeah.
it helps us realize, wait a minute, they don't really, ultimately, they don't care about me on the stage as the quote unquote speaker.
Right.
How can I get right to their problem? Then they're going to care. Boy, people are going to be captivated and lean in. If we just did that, we just listened to your advice right there, man, they're just going to lean in.
I mean, honestly, Jason, when someone asks me for advice on public speaking and I don't have the ability to dig in with them and to figure out some stuff, if like when I've gone to events like conferences and they're just kind of scamming for tips or something like that, I don't give them the silver bullet as the tip. I explain to them the importance of framing it in the context of a problem that their audience cares about. In fact, I remember I put that concept into a webinar I did years ago. It was about 8 years ago now. I put together this webinar that was about how to be more effective as a speaker. And one of the 5 concepts I taught in that webinar was what we're talking about now. And a gentleman who became my client, we did work together, but before we worked together, he just watched the free webinar and more explicitly brought the audience's problem into the beginning of his talk. Usually he would get 2 or 3 new speaking gigs because he had a system for getting gigs, turning gigs into more gigs.
Yep.
And he would get 2 or 3 more gigs from each talk he gave. This time he did that little tweak. He hadn't worked with me yet. He didn't change anything else. He got 11 new gigs from that one engagement to the tune. I mean, back then he was more of a four-figure speaker. Now he's 5 figures. But I think he made about $90,000 in fees from that off the back of that one talk because he made that slight change.
Wow.
And so it's not the whole process. Like I said, it's only the first of 4 parts. But if you're not going to do anything else, just do that because that will get your audience at least invested in whatever it is you have to say.
Yeah. So hit him with the problem. I think sometimes people hear, scare them, you know, uh, you know, shock them. We don't want to go to
Mm.
that end, right?
I mean, there is some value if you have some statistics that
Okay.
are particularly surprising, that could be effective. But the point isn't to shock them.
Right.
If you think that your job as a speaker is to go up and shock your audience, then you don't understand your underlying the importance of your role. You don't
Right.
understand your purpose. What is the actual purpose of a speaker? To convince audiences that change is possible.
Hmm.
That's the point, to empower people to believe that they can create meaningful change in their life. People are not empowered by your information. They're not empowered by your shock. They're not empowered by your credentials. They're empowered by the belief that change is possible. And that's really what I want to see happen more and more in the speaking world, is to make every decision around how do we convince this audience that they can do this.
Wow. And if we did that, if we got that focused, we only have so much time and we end up
Right.
using some of our time for, useless things. We would be so much better time managers with our presentations if we
Right.
kept focus on that.
Yeah. I mean, when we think about all the times that, and a lot of speakers do this, so I understand that this might surprise some people, but one of the things I repeatedly feel myself needing to do with my clients is to get them to stop asking their audience to have a show of hands for who has this issue or who can do this, because they think that interaction like that is going to make it a more captivating or engaging talk.
Yep.
And it doesn't make it more engaging. In fact, it's giving the audience work to do. The thing that is going to really help with interaction is if you ask them to weigh in on something and that information affects the rest of the presentation. I'm not saying that you shouldn't interact with your audience. I'm saying if you're going to interact, it needs to be to a greater end. It needs to be serving some purpose. Like, let's say you do Slido or one of those other softwares that they tap in an answer on the phone. you could look at the results on the screen and say, okay, given that this is what you're dealing with, let's tailor some of these tools to what you're struggling with right now. That's
Yep.
real-time feedback that could be of tremendous value to your audience. That helps. You're customizing your information or content to them. That's wonderfully empowering. It builds more trust, so they're more likely to want to listen to you, and it's helping them to relate to the material that you have. That's wonderful. That's a very important part of convincing people that they can do a thing. But just arbitrarily asking them to raise their hands and then doing nothing with the information, it just wastes time and it wastes energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah, it's right up there in some of the fun things that we do. Uh,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just
There's so
great.
many of them, right?
Yeah. Okay, so we name the problem, we kind of loop them in, and then
Right.
we
The second part.
the second
The
part.
second part is identifying the flawed typical solutions.
Mm.
How do we solve this problem? Well, usually what we do is blank or blank. Like, let's say you had a revolutionary new way to quit smoking. So you talk about how hard it is to quit smoking. That's the problem. That's part one. But then part two is like, what do we try? We try the nicotine patch or nicotine gum. We try vaping. We try hypnotherapy. We try all of these things to kick this horrible habit. But these things don't usually work, do they? They just try to break us free of this or they do that. I've never smoked, so I don't actually know what it's like to try to quit smoking, but we can imagine
Yeah.
how frustrated people start to get in real time when you name all the solutions that they've probably tried and just don't work. And what that does, Jason, is it really grounds people in this hardship, this belief that it's not a solvable problem. It's like, yeah, I've tried all these things, it doesn't work.
Ah.
But then because we move forward regardless, what happens right after we say, oh, this problem is not solvable, but based on what the speaker says, but what if it is? What if there was a way out of this? Because these things don't work. What if something else does? Or maybe they're not at that really bottom level and they're just like, oh, maybe they just maybe there is a different way, or what is a better way, or like the question is in their mind, what if there is a different way out of this issue? So you bring them into that valley with the flawed solutions, and then you take them out of that valley, and
Ooh.
when they come along with you on that ride, that's going to really help them to get invested in a different possibility, which, as I said, is the main point.
Boy, I love that because you're making them feel like, oh, we're all in this together. Yeah, he gets it. I get it. We're,
Yeah.
and they're leaning in like they know, and now you're about to hit them with a
There was
solution.
Yeah, there's not only, I like to say that the only hard and fast rule of communication is that there are no hard and fast rules. And so this isn't to say that you have to do all of these things, but what I've found over the years is that this really does take them along on a journey that makes them open. It's like a flower opening its petals to the sun. These first two steps open them up to a different possibility, and then when you hit them with part number three, which of course is the silver bullet idea, this one sentence,
Yep.
this Sun Tzu, Socrates, and lots of TED Talks kind of sentence, when you hit them with that, then they're like, oh, wow, that's really powerful. Now I have the recipe for success. I know fundamentally what I need to do differently. And so when you hit them with that, then the flower is fully open to the sun and they are just ready to drink in all the tools, all the information that you have to offer. Most people start with the tools. What I'm offering is first get them primed to receive the tools,
Yep.
and then they will not only believe in those tools, but they'll actually do something with them.
That's brilliant. Just brilliant. Just prepares them.
Prepares them. So with all of that said, the fourth part is usually what people do. They just talk about what they do, or they talk about what you must do, like the tools and all of that. Like I said, they often start with that. Well, I'm an engineer and I do this, or If in a talk they say, all right, here's 5 things you need to learn about being an entrepreneur, whatever it might be. But now you provide the what, you provide the, here are the things, here's what you need to do now, or here's
Yeah.
what I do, whatever it is. Like I said, it depends based on the situation and the format, but fundamentally that's the structure. The problem, the flawed typical solution, your big idea, what I call the silver bullet. And then finally the fourth part is the what, the here's what you do now. Or technically it could be like the how to part, like all of the supporting chapters of the book, whatever it might be.
Right. Right.
The
Oh,
action.
boy, that's good. So take us into like a conversation. You're walking this through with, someone at a networking event. Obviously that's going to be much shorter than, a sales presentation,
Of
but it's
course.
still
Of
same
course.
structure, same flow.
Right. What's interesting about the elevator pitch type of thing when you're in a conversation at a networking event, what people listening or watching might think is, oh, well, that guy Neil said these are the 4 parts. So someone asked me what I do. I'm going to do these 4 parts very precisely. I have my planned speech and it's going to be awesome. And I also want to emphasize that if you show up in these kind of informal situations in a super canned or rigid way, that's going to come across more than what you're saying.
Right.
And so I want to really stress that human connection is such an important part of networking, and arguably it might even be more important than how you specifically craft the elevator pitch.
Yep.
These things are so subjective and so case by case. That being said, a workaround there to make it not so formal and stuffy is to frame the first 2 parts as kind of like questions. Like,
Mm.
you know how hard it is to quit smoking?
Yep.
And they're like, oh yeah, oh God, I smoked from the time I was 15 to 35, and quitting was the hardest thing I ever did.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and I'm sure at the time, and many other people who struggle with smoking, a lot of things that you might do are the nicotine patch, nicotine gum, vaping, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, yep, I tried all of those things, didn't work. You're having more of a back and forth, a conversation at this point. And
Yep.
especially if they take the reins of the conversation and take control away from you, which people will do, then you've got them talking about themselves. And even though you haven't finished your elevator pitch, you got them talking. And that's, again, in service of the connection, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But let's
Yep.
say, well, I'm sorry, you're saying you're going to tell me what you do. So what do you do then? Let's say that they're disciplined enough to bring the attention back to you. Then you say, all right, well, the key to smoking is not any of those things. The key to the key to quitting smoking. The key to quitting smoking is not any of those things. It's blank. Like whatever the solution might be. That's the silver bullet.
Yep.
The key to quitting smoking is not this or that. It's actually blank.
Yep.
And so what I do is I help people to peacefully and permanently quit smoking without all of the agony and the grief and the frustration that usually comes from letting go of something so addictive.
Right.
Something like that. So you still
Right.
get to say what you do, and you're still having the conversation, but it's baked within it is this recipe for future success that is going to empower your listeners. Like, oh wow, that's all I had to do. I got to tell this to my uncle. He's still smoking, and et cetera,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then you have an empowering message.
And you have a referable message because just like you said at the end, if they understand it, they're immediately
Yeah.
thinking about somebody that they know who's also dealing with it. And they can go, oh,
Right.
I need to introduce you to,
So and
so-and-so.
so. Exactly.
Wow. That's just huge.
Exactly.
That's just huge.
That's the power of empowering people, not just selling them or
Right.
steamrolling them with your stuff. That's the power and potency of empowering others to convince them that change is possible,
Yep.
because that's catches on like wildfire.
Oh, I love that. Probably be a whole other podcast. And I know our listeners will love it when they dive into your book, but the process of finding that silver bullet,
Yeah.
I find it's just a wrestle. Do you ever find that it's, should it be a short process? Should it be something you ruminate on a
Mm.
while? Like, is it something that you just pick and then move on? Do you wrestle with it? What's your thoughts on that?
I've had clients where we actually found their silver bullet in 10 minutes.
Mm.
And the silver bullet that I shared earlier about people are empowered not by that which they know is true, but rather that which they believe is possible. That became the silver bullet I used to explain silver bullets, basically. I wrestled with that, to use your word, Jason. I wrestled with that for a year and a half. I tried to find clarity around that. And because I didn't have me to talk to, and I was also newer to the process.
Yeah.
But with all that said, every situation is different. I've had clients, they go through a worksheet that I give them, and they actually already have their silver bullet before they even need my help. I mean, it's amazing to see that happen. It's
Yeah.
like, oh no, that's what it is. I like that kind of thing.
Yep.
We talk about it and confirm that it does feel essential to them.
Yeah.
But so yeah, and I can this happens in the book too, but I'm very happy just to give this to our listeners. There's a simple tool that you can use to start finding clarity around what it might be. And do you remember the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there's a scene very early on in that movie where Jonah's character is explaining to Brad's character what the Moneyball concept is. And he says there's an epidemic failure within the game to understand what is really happening.
Oof.
Your goal shouldn't be to buy players. Your goal should be to buy wins. And the way to buy wins is to buy runs.
Oof.
And so he doesn't say it exactly as a silver bullet, but he has an idea that is silver bulletable. And
Yep.
that you could say that the key to winning at baseball is not to buy players, but rather to buy runs. Right. And that could be the silver bullet there. But for our purposes in finding a silver bullet, we can use what I call the epidemic failure exercise,
Mm.
which is the epidemic failure and how whichever people are trying to solve this problem is that they blank. That's the flawed solution that we talked about earlier. So the epidemic failure and how most people try to solve this problem is that they blank. But the true way to solve this problem is blank. And so when you do this, you are creating something very potent for finding this clarity. You're finding contrast.
Mm.
Contrast creates clarity.
Oh.
This, what it does is it lights up the brain. So when we think about the solutions of which we least approve, the ones we deem epidemic failures, it lights up our brain to think, well, if that's not what it is, what is it? And so contrast creates clarity. And this is really, it's not the only way to find clarity around your silver bullet, but it's a very simple and predictable way to do it.
Yep. Wow. My goodness. That is absolute gold. And I know many listeners, it could just be a game changer for them if they capture onto that. That's just incredible. Absolutely. Before I let you go, we kind of turn the corner. What's one actionable, like, to our listeners that you would give them today? Like, hey, today, concentrate on working on this to become more of a persuasive communicator, even if it's just this one thing. Is there something that you would encourage them with?
I would say to get absolutely religious about what problem your target audience truly cares about solving.
Hmm.
Not the problem as you understand it as the expert, the problem as they understand it. This is something I actually call the trudge to the bathroom test. When people wake up in the morning and they're groggy and they haven't gotten enough sleep and they're achy and they're stiff and they get up off their bed and they hobble to the bathroom, they trudge to the bathroom. What are they thinking about? What is weighing on them? Are they thinking about how they're going to make payroll because of poor cash flow that month? Are they thinking about a parent teacher conference they have to have with their kid's teacher that they're dreading? Are they thinking about how heavy they feel and how they really need to lose those 30 pounds? What are they honestly thinking about in
Yeah.
that moment at the beginning of their day? Because it's not ever a solution to someone else's solution to a problem. Like, I really need to find a game-changing way to engage my workforce kind of thing, they're going to think, man, these Gen Zers are killing me. I just can't stand how they're on their phones all freaking day. And as soon as I ask them to do work, they start getting snotty with me and
Right.
entitled that they shouldn't have to do anything. It's driving me up the wall. They're not thinking about engagement. They're not thinking about culture. They're not thinking about any of that stuff. They're thinking about how much they can't stand that 23-year-old who never does their work.
Yep.
So that's the thing I want people to really geek out on. Get religious about the problem as their target audience cares about it, thinks about it, feels about it. And then from there, they will find that people are much more attuned to what they have to say.
Oof. I love that. I love that. Well, before we let you go, we're building this online library for leaders
Mm,
to go check out to get new ideas, resources. And so we ask our
yeah.
guests the same three questions. Is there a speaker? And I know you've worked with a ton, so maybe a little bit tough, but is there a speaker that you've heard, you listen to regularly, or, they just blow you away, check everything off
Mm.
the, checklist, and you're just like, oof, I gotta tell somebody about them.
I would say that my answer to that off the cuff, Jason, is Dan Pink's TED Talk on the puzzle of motivation.
Ooh.
He gave it, as of this recording, he gave it about 15 years ago, 16 years ago. And it is such a great demonstration of how you lead to a silver bullet. You don't just
Oh.
hammer them with it out the gates. You very deliberately and strategically lead to it. So, about 2/3 of the way into his talk, he finally reveals it after building it up and building it up and building it up. And that's
Huh.
really something that is, I do some version of that with all of my clients. Is like, I don't have them start with learning objectives, I have them start with a mystery, and they're going to lean in because they're going to want to have that mystery solved. And
Yeah.
then you solve it with the silver bullet. So that's
Oof.
a really good
Oh,
talk to check out.
I love that. And we'll link that in the show notes. If
Sure.
you're a podcast listener, is there a podcast, either guilty pleasure or development, that you just keep coming back to, you recommend to other
I
people?
I love Conan O'Brien's
Ah,
podcast. Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. In fact, I've been meaning to watch this week's episode with Adam Scott because my wife and I are really into Severance right now.
oh yeah.
And yeah, and so I want to hear. I just heard Ben Stiller on that podcast talking about it, and I want to hear what Adam Scott has to say too.
I need to watch Severance.
Yeah.
Everyone's told me I need to, and I need to. It needs to go on the list. This is another reminder.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of like Stanley Kubrick meets Office Space.
Oh, all right, love it. And then lastly, you meet a leader on the side of the road. They said they're going to a desert island. You make sure they take one book with them. What's the book that you're sending with them?
Ooh, well, you know what? Probably because I just wrote a fable myself, I would have to say Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist.
Oof.
I just,
Yeah.
I love it's not only a great little story, but it also just is a great reminder of living deliberately and intentionally. And so it's both entertaining and also incites meaningful reflection, at least for me. So
Yeah.
I would say that that would be a good one.
I love it. Well, Neil, where can we send our listeners? Where can they find you? What's the best place to get all your information?
I would say that go to my website, neilcanhelp.com. And the homepage, I've just recently changed my homepage where you have all of these long form videos to go deeper that are completely free, and you don't even have to put in an email address to watch them. It's like a choose your own adventure video on the homepage. Do you want to learn about speaking or writing a book or entrepreneurship or a nonprofit leadership kind of thing?
Huh.
And so that's a really good way to go. And of course, I would love for people to check out my book
Yes.
as a way to. It is a fable. It's very meant to be very engaging and highly accessible, and just a nice, light, enjoyable read.
Boy, I love it. And we're going to get a couple extra copies and do giveaways in the speakers group. So, listeners, if
Beautiful.
you are not a part of the speakers group, go to Facebook and type in the speakers group and join, because we'll be giving those away when this episode airs. Neil, I can't thank you enough. This has been truly, truly incredible. I love geeking out over these type of things
Yeah,
because
me too.
when communicators can learn from someone who has put together a framework as brilliantly as you have, I mean, it just takes them to a different level. So thank you for sharing, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you as well, Jason. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. Thank you for leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And thank you for every like and every comment. Every single time you cut and copy a link and send it to a coworker or a friend, it absolutely means the world, and it helps each other transform our communication skills. Lastly, don't forget about a great resource that's available to you, our communication skills library. At the end of every episode, we ask each guest their favorite speaker, their favorite podcast, their favorite book, and we've compiled all of those resources together to give you an amazing library to continue your growth and development. Thank you again for being a listener and for being a part of the Speak with People community.